Okay, hi everyone. Welcome back to Cafe Oleh. My name is Jay Rosen. I'm a volunteer with Nefesh B'Nefesh. I also made Aliyah with them just over 15 years ago. Here at Cafe Oleh, we go over the everyday Hebrew you need here in Israel to succeed, whether that's learning how to read your utility bills or go grocery shopping and reading nutritional labels, keeping up with the news with even the most basic of Hebrew. Um, excuse me, all the everyday Hebrew that you may or may not have learned in Ulpan or in day school or in yeshiva or in university or just being here in Israel, but that really sets you apart from other olim who are often struggling with the language, let alone everyday life here in Israel. As always, we appreciate and encourage you to submit ideas for upcoming classes. This is very much a user-forward and user-friendly class. So we want to hear from you what topics you want us to go over that we haven't already gone over. For those of you who are new here, all of our previous lessons are up on YouTube. You just go to youtube.com, type in Cafe Oleh or Nefesh B'Nefesh, subscribe to the Nefesh B'Nefesh channel, and you'll get updates for all the upcoming lessons. This lesson itself will come up will be uploaded in the next 1 to 2 days. All our previous ones are there. You can see them in a whole channel, go through all the previous lessons. So if I go too fast tonight, or you have to clock out, or you want to go over the vocabulary we're about to go through again, you'll have all the opportunity to do so there. Before we get started for today, another important public service announcement. This week will be the last week of 2021. We're going to take a short break while Nefesh B'Nefesh rejiggers some of the technical aspects behind the scenes so that in 2022, you'll be able to sign up and there'll be one participation link to enter Zoom for the whole duration of Cafe Oleh each week. Much easier on your end. As always, we're trying to make this easy for you as we can. With that, we are going to start. So last week, for those of you who joined us, you'll remember we went over introductions, greetings, and closing conversations. The idea being, excuse me, the idea being that small talk is very important, even here in Israel, where small talk and networking isn't necessarily as much of a thing as in other countries. It's always good to get a refresher of how you actually start a conversation, and hopefully all of you will be able to find the confidence to do so. And in the coming weeks, certainly today and when we come back from our break, we will go over how you fill in the actual conversation, what you talk about when it's small talk, right? Today, we're going to go over a very pertinent one right now, which is the weather. Not just because everyone likes to talk about weather as small talk, it's easy, it's neutral in many respects, although we can always pick a fight over everything here in Israel. We're in the middle of a rather large storm that is taking its precious time in getting through the country. It's been nicknamed Carmel. There is now a system much appropriating the American naming of hurricanes to name any major storm systems that come through Greece, Cyprus, and Israel, and they go through a rotation between the three countries of different names. And so we're going to do that here. I see from a couple people writing in the chat, apologies again, but because we took a break 1 week because I was sick, we simply moved forward all the other classes. So when we come back in mid-January, we'll be going over the one class that we have not done, which is medical appointments, although big warning ahead. I am not going into everyone's personal medical issues there. I am by no means that kind of expert, nor should you ever trust anyone other than a doctor. I'm just seeing a few people writing in the chat window. Thank you for doing that. About to start the class. If you have any questions about this specific class, please write it in the Q&A window. If it's anything else about future classes, you want to be angry at me that we're not talking about medical appointments, please write that in the chat window. There are right now more than 60 of you on this call with more signing in. There's only one of me. It helps me a lot to facilitate this class. If you write those things in the chat, everything about this actual class, please write in the Q&A. Let's get started. So we are going to discuss a little bit more of small talk, and we're going to start with weather. Weather, like I said, is pretty neutral, and as such, people like to talk about it a lot. And it's, again, very pertinent right now as we're in this major storm system that just started here in Israel. So all the better to go over those words. And then, like I said, after the break, we'll go over some more small talk as well as medical appointments, all that fun stuff, and all of your other ideas. So with that, we're going to start up here at the top. Very simple, the word for what? Ma. Okay, we use this word as both a question, but also in the course of a sentence. Okay, the next word, hayom, today, very simple. And then the word for weather, mezeg avir. Mezeg is related to the word mazgan, a very important word here in Israel, which is an air conditioner. It's also related to the word mizug and limazeg, which is to merge. And the idea here is mezeg ha'avir, avir, we're going to get to in a little bit, means air. The idea is understanding that weather is comprised of different fronts, different systems, different types of things together. So the term for weather in Hebrew, mezeg ha'avir, is the summation of all the different air patterns, of air systems, of airs in over the state and land of Israel, right? Because remember, ancient times, weather was controlled by the winds and they came from different directions. We very much know that with how the weather patterns work here in Israel. Cold and wet weather always come from the north and the west. Hot and dry weather always come from the east and the south. And so the idea of avir, air, is a very important part of weather systems here in Israel. Again, some basic words, not that I'm a human dictionary, but just so that you have them under your belt. Bachutz, outside. Bifnim, inside. Okay, obviously you're not going to be asking what's the weather like inside, but when I've taught this lesson before, people wanted to know, well, does avir, which we're going to get to in a minute, air, does that also mean atmosphere in the sense of ambiance? Like, what's the mood of a place? And that's a very good question. We'll get to that word very shortly. But just so that you're also able to say, right now you have 1, 2, 3, 4, first 4 lines, you can now ask someone, what's the weather like outside today? Ma mezeg ha'avir bachutz hayom. Okay, row 2, ma mezeg ha'avir, row 4, bachutz, row 5, hayom, row 3. Okay, so already you're able to start a conversation. After last week's class, we asked, hi, how are you doing? What's new? How are you feeling? All of that stuff. You can then get into some more small talk of, what's the weather like today? Maybe you haven't been outside yet. Maybe you're talking to someone in a different part of the country. Maybe you're outside of the country and you're talking to someone in Israel, or vice versa. The point though is, you already have a great question to start off small conversation. Okay, ma mezeg ha'avir bachutz hayom. You can also say ma mezeg ha'avir hayom bachutz. Right, there's a little bit of flexibility in Hebrew with regards to word order. What's the weather outside today? What's the weather today outside like? You can play around with that a little bit. Let's get to that word avir. Avir means air, or avir. If you cannot say the letter resh, like resh, and you say it like resh, perfectly acceptable. Avir is air. A me'avrer is a fan, right? Something that moves around the air. So another really good word to have under your belt. And then related to the word avir is avira. Avira is ambiance or atmosphere. Like, right, if you want to ask someone, ma avira bifnim hayom, what's the ambiance, what's the atmosphere like inside today? Maybe you're in an office, maybe you're going to someone's house. The point though is, just like we have the word avir, we get from the same word, same root, avira, atmosphere. not just talking about atmosphere in the meteorological sense, but in the actual, inside someone's home or a building. Okay, let's go through some more basic words. Some of this may be basic for some of you. I'm going to add some extra words in there to further embellish your vocabulary, because there are some really good words when it comes to weather here in Israel. The basic seasons you all know, right? Aviv is spring, Kaitz is summer, Stav is fall or autumn, if you will. Cholef, number 14, is winter. I also added a really good word for you to know. You should know this word. We're already just about past Stav here in Israel, just about past fall, even though it is mid-December, so we're actually quite past it. But we have a very beautiful word in Hebrew called Shalekhet. Shalekhet is the act of leaves falling, or falling leaves, however you want to think about it. Shalekhet is a great word that we use. We only use it once a year in the fall. It's obviously very poetic. Its root, shin lamed chaf, because remember every week we talk about new shorashim, new roots. The roots of words dictate their basic meaning. This word has to do with casting off or casting away. Lahashlich is to throw something away, right? Those of you who have a more rich Jewish background, during Rosh Hashanah, there's the act of tashlich, of symbolically casting away your sins into a body of water. It's related to this word shalekhet, the falling of leaves, right? A tree sheds its leaves in fall. It's the same idea here. So a beautiful word. You can also use this word. You'll often hear it used not just to describe stav, to describe fall, but also to use it in place of the word stav. Okay, some real basic words again, but always important to go through the basics. Shemesh is sun, pretty simple there. Yareach is moon. Okay, Shemesh, sun, Yareach, moon. Kochav is a star, both a star in the sky, but just like in English, it's a star as in the star of a play, the star of the movie, the star of the show was. You can use the same word, Kochav. Okay. Me'unan. Me'unan is cloudy. It's a good word to know, not just because it's the name of a hit from the 1990s here in Israel. There was, you remember the 90s were full of boy bands, pop bands that were all comprised of guys. And so the local Israeli version was a group called High Five, right? Like High Five. And their hit song was Yom Me'unan, a cloudy day. It's actually a very peppy song for something called Cloudy Day. Look it up on YouTube. It's important Israeli cultural literacy, I would say. Okay, and from the word me'unan, from that same root of ain, nun, nun, we get the word for an actual cloud, anan. Okay, anan is a cloud, ananim are clouds. Now, this is the land of Israel. This is Hebrew, and as such, we have a lot of words for precipitation. I didn't put down the word for precipitation because we usually don't talk about precipitation. We talk about what actually falls, right? And in Hebrew, we have multiple types of words for types of rain, when rain falls, all sorts of different things like that. Let's go through some of the big ones. First off, the one you probably know is Geshem. Now, Geshem in Hebrew, in modern Hebrew, is really heavy rain. Like just a few minutes ago before we came online here, it was really driving heavy rain. That is Geshem. Okay, that is on the one hand the catch-all term for rain in Hebrew, but it really refers to heavy rain, not sprinkles, not showers, not anything else. Okay, so Geshem. The other word that we have for rain in Hebrew is matar or matar. Okay, matar is more like light rain. I wrote here rain shower, right? Think something a little bit less driving, a little less intense is matar. Most of the rain that falls here in Israel is typically matar, right? It's not pounding rain. It's usually like sprinkles and then stops and sprinkles and stops, or it comes in a wave and stops. Okay. Matar is the word that is the more common type of rain here. It's also the root from which we get the words, for example, mitria, an umbrella is a mitria, right? It's the thing that protects you from matar, from rain. We also get the word mamtera. I did not put this word on here because it's an agricultural word, and I would assume the vast majority of you are not engaged in agricultural work. I apologize if I'm wrong in that. But mamtera is a sprinkler, like you would put in a lawn or in a field. It's a modern word, obviously, that needed to be created in the kibbutz movement of how do we irrigate and water our fields. So from the term matar, rain, which is also in Jewish liturgy, we get the modern words mitria, umbrella, and mamtera, a sprinkler. Okay, another word for rain, tiftuf. Tiftuf is meant to be onomatopoeia, the sound of drops of rain hitting a roof, tiftuf. It's really drizzle. You could also call it sprinkle. It's really, really light rain. It's the lightest rain of them all. Okay. So drizzle is tiftuf. Now, what we're experiencing right now in Israel is a storm. In Hebrew, we have two different words for a storm. We have sufa and se'ara. Now, there is a meteorological distinction between the two. One is considered has stronger winds than the other, but both in ancient Hebrew and for our purposes in modern Hebrew mean the exact same thing. A sufa or se'ara are both storms. They're both the words that we use for storm. They're used interchangeably. They are understood to mean a storm. A storm is defined here in Israel as having gusty winds and some sort of precipitation. Okay, so sufa, se'ara, whichever one you prefer to say, they'll both be understood 100% as storm. Okay. From the word se'ara or se'ara, we get the word so'er or so'er. So'er is an adjective and it means stormy, right? So I could say ha'erev, this evening, so'er bachutz. It is stormy outside, right? Or I could say the meeting between the two workers was so'er, was stormy, or tempestuous, if you like a bigger word, right? So so'er, stormy, cannot just be used to describe the weather, but also, like we talked about, avir and avira, the atmosphere of a place, right? If there's stormy, it's a stormy situation between the two. The mood in the office today was stormy, right? It's not to say that a cloud bursted and started raining on the computers. Rather, the atmosphere was stormy. Okay, a very good word to have. Also, sa'ar or sa'ar is a boy's name in modern Israel. A very, I think, a nice name, even though it does mean storm, but that is the name of one of the X-Men, right? So it's okay. All right, a few more words for precipitation. This is, again, like I said, matar, that word for rain shower is the most common. Here's the word you'll often see when you read the forecast in Hebrew is mimtarim or mimtarim. Mimtarim are showers, right? We took that word matar, that specific type of light rain, and we turned it into a related word, rain showers, mimtarim. Okay, you'll see this word used quite a lot if you read the forecast in Hebrew. Just like in other countries, it's best to read the local meteorological forecast as opposed to weather.com or AccuWeather.com. I'm actually going to write in the chat window the official meteorological service for the state of Israel. It's a great website. It also has English, but it's a good website for you to have, for you to be able to see the weather forecast coming up for the next, I think it's 4 or 5 days they use, as well as the radar, things like that. You'll notice in Israel, by the way, when you read the forecast for the weather, they often don't put exact temperatures for the day. It's usually a bar graph. We're a little bit more honest in ambiguity when it comes to weather forecasts. So it's a nice, you'll get used to it. Okay, part of this storm we're currently having, there is also the forecast for Sheleg. Sheleg is snow. Sheleg typically falls in higher elevations here in Israel. So the first place to get snow during any storm is usually Har Hermon or Mount Hermon in the Golan Heights, followed by other high places in the Golan Heights. And then it slowly moves south, but again, it's based on elevation. So the highest points in the north of the country, the highest points in the center of the country, and so forth. Okay. Our next two words, cham and kar, hot and cold, right? Cham and kar, very important words, not to describe the temperature outside, but also to describe yourself, if you are feeling hot or cold, right? So if I want to say I'm hot, I'm actually sitting right under my heater, so I am a bit hot, I would say cham li. Okay, this is gender inclusive. So if you're a woman, you would also say cham li. You would say, and the only thing that changes is the li part, right? It is literally hot to me, is what I'm saying here. But if you want to ask someone if they're hot, you can ask cham lecha to a woman, to a man, excuse me, or cham lach to a woman. Cham lecha to a man, cham lach to a woman. Okay, the opposite of cham is kar. Same thing, right? We use it the same way. Kar li, I'm cold. Kar lecha, are you cold to a man? And so forth. Okay, next words. Chamim and karir. Okay, chamim and karir, simply take the words cham and kar and then dilute them a bit, right? We have this form quite a bit in Hebrew where we double up the last letter of these words and we end up coming a new word that is not quite the same meaning, it's almost there. So instead of saying chamli, instead of saying hot, I just want to say warm. It's chamim, right? We double up that last letter, becomes chamim, warm. Same thing with cool. Instead of saying less cold or a little cold, we simply say karir. We take the last letter resh and we double it up. So instead of kar, karir. Okay, you can use these again to describe the weather, to describe an object, to describe yourself. Okay, you could say the meeting between the two people was chamim, right? The meeting between the two of them was warm. Just as much as you could, the weather, something you're cooking, and so forth. Okay. Dry and wet, pretty straightforward, all obviously very important to know in the middle of the storm that we're currently having. Yavesh is dry, ratuv is wet. Okay, and all these two will conjugate based on what you're talking about. So if I was saying I am wet, let's say I was walking outside and I got wet, I would say ani ratuv, I am wet, or my bag is wet, hatik sheli ratuv. Okay, and both of these will conjugate, so yavesh, yavesha, yaveshim, yaveshot, ratuv, retuva, retuvim, retuvot. Okay, all of those you can look up on your own, but just so that you have the basic words under your belt. Okay, a very important word here in Tel Aviv, where I live for at least half the year, and also from my native Washington, D.C., is the word lach. Lach with a chet at the end, very important that it's spelled with a chet. We've talked about spelling is destiny in Hebrew, and this word is no less different. Lach with a chet is humid. Lachut is humidity. Lach is humid. If you were to spell that differently, it would mean something completely different. I'm not going to say aloud what that is so as to engender such thinking, except to say spelling is destiny. Even if two letters sound the same in Hebrew, you must spell it accordingly. Okay, no substitutions, no swaps. Lach with a chet, humid. Na'im is nice or pleasant. We had this word last week when we were talking about general introductions, how to start a conversation. So na'im me'od, remember, na'im me'od, it's nice to meet you, or Na'im me'od lahakir otcha. It's very nice to have met you. Na'im can also be in pleasant, as in the weather is pleasant. This word is always what they call in English a shibboleth, which is from actually Hebrew shibolet, which is a means by which to identify someone. This word, temperatura, right? Temperatura, we do have a way to say this in Hebrew, but most people will simply say temperatura. If you have a hard time saying the letter resh, this one will really tongue tie, will tie you up your tongue, or tongue tie, as I said. Temperatura, if you say temperatura, it is perfectly all right. And the lesson I always give, and I gave last week even, and I will give again, especially as we talk about the weather, is that the chief meteorologist for the state of Israel on Israeli radio, who was heard on the top of the hour, if not every 30 minutes on the top radio stations for decades, right, was an Anglo himself who made Aliyah with the thickest Anglo accent you can think of. And he would say every day, ha temperatura hayom. Okay, so that is a public service announcement to all of us. It is okay to have an accent in a country of olim, in a country of immigrants. So if you can't say temperatura, it is perfectly all right to say temperatura, because the chief meteorologist told us it was okay for many decades. Okay, this word does come from Hebrew, which is, we do have its own version in Hebrew, which is ma'alot. Ma'alot are degrees, right? Same related to the word aliyah, and la'alot is ma'alot. Okay, ma'alot are degrees. So if it is 15 degrees out, which it might be actually, it is 11 degrees right now in Tel Aviv. So it is 11 ma'alot. Okay, 11 ma'alot is 11 degrees. Remember, this is Israel, i.e. the entire world except the United States. So we use Celsius here. Learn how to get used to it, folks, my fellow Americans. Okay, so ma'alot, we are almost always talking about Celsius in Hebrew in Israel, but it is understood if you just say ma'alot, you don't need to follow that up with Celsius unless it's understood you were talking about, a much bigger number. Okay, a few more words and then get to your questions. And then we will probably break early this evening ahead of our short break for the next few weeks. So sharav. Sharav is often confused with the word khamsin, which I did not put up here. Khamsin comes from the Arabic for 50 and refers to a specific type of weather pattern, usually a wind that comes from the desert. Sharav is something very different. It's related, but still different. Sharav is a heat wave. Remember what I said before at the beginning of this lesson, that cold and wet weather in Israel come from the north and the west. Hot and dry weather come from the east and the south. A sharav happens when the wind changes and there's not only no wind, but when there is, it's coming from the east or the south. It sometimes has sand that's in the air that's whipped up, but often it's defined by there's no wind current. There's no wind pattern in the air. And it particularly happens in the summer. There's usually a big one at the end of the summer ahead of Stav, the fall. It is, for those of you who have lived in Israel already or have traveled in Israel during a sharav, it is very uncomfortable. There's usually a natural break in the weather in the evening with the colder air coming from the sea. Sharav means there is no colder air coming in. So when it gets hot, it stays hot. It's quite uncomfortable. It's a term that's used quite a lot in the summer when forecasting the weather, if there's going to be a sharav and when it breaks. We talk about that a lot, either sof hasharav, the end of the sharav, or matai hasharav yishbor, when will the sharav break? Literally using the verb for to break. Sometimes they use the verb to end or to cease, but we like the word break because we do not like sharav. The last one is another precipitation word, barad. Barad is not only one of the 10 plagues, it is very much happens here in Israel when it rains. Usually we get very small pieces of barad when it does fall, but sometimes it can be bigger. Barad is the word for hail. Excuse me, very simple. Barad is also the term for any of those slushy drinks that you've seen in convenience stores or in cafes. It's usually some bright colored flavored syrup thing that's spinned around like a slushy or a frosty or wherever you are in the world, whatever you call it. And now that 7-Eleven is about to open in Israel in the next year, you'll have Slurpees as well. All of those in modern Hebrew are called barat, right? Think like slush, think sleet, whatever it is that helps you understand. We're talking about hail as well as a slushy drink. A few more words, and then let's get to your questions. So when we're talking about the weather, we're talking about small talk again. In all of this, we also want to talk not just about today, we want to talk about the various days of the week, not the names of the days, but how to reference what happens or what will happen, right? So tomorrow, machar, yesterday, etmol, these two words you probably know already, but let's do some words you probably don't know and are still used in modern Hebrew. The first one is shilshon, right? Shilshon means 2 days ago, the day before yesterday. Okay, we do use this word in Hebrew. Yes, you can say literally 2 days ago, which would be lifnei yomayim. Lifnei is before, or in this case, ago. Yomayim are 2 days. Yom is 1 day. Yomayim are 2 days. But in modern Hebrew, it's also, we say shilshom. And if you want to sound more fluent in your Hebrew, it's not about accents, it's about vocabulary. Shilshom will definitely set you apart. Okay, so shilshom is the next word that we have. This is a great word. I love this word, not just because it's beautiful, it's also used in other Semitic languages, which is emesh. Emesh specifically refers to last night or last evening, yesterday evening or last night. Okay, it's only referring to that. It's not referring to the all of yesterday, which is etmol. Just yesterday evening, last night, however you want to say it, is emesh. A great word, I think. And then the day after tomorrow, right? If tomorrow is machal, 2 days from now, the day after tomorrow, the name of that action film with Dennis Quaid is Machartaim or Machartaim. However you want to pronounce it, Machartaim or Machartaim, it is 2 days from now. Okay, it's just simply taking the word machar, adding the dual ending, aim, great word to have. A few more words, again, that can describe weather as well as avir, but also avira, atmosphere. And this is great for talking small talk, right? There's no pressure, there's no anything else. You just want to describe something. In general, these are great words to have also in your repertoire. The first one is matuach. Matuach means tense or volatile, right? Metach is tension, but matuach is the adjective. Tense, volatile, matuach, metucha, metuchim, metuchot. Hamatzav matuach me'od. The situation is very tense. Okay, great word to have. Not a great situation to be in, but a great word to be able to describe, use to describe. Kitzoni is extreme. Again, this can be weather, this can be a situation, this can be a person. An extremist is a kitzoni, just like the weather can be kitzoni, extreme. Okay, this actually is an interesting word. It comes from one of the words we have in Hebrew for end, an end, which is ketz. So if you think of a spectrum, right, something that is at its end, at the end of it is at its extreme, right? So something that's at its end is kitzoni. It is of its extreme ending, extreme point. It's a cool way to think about how the words are interrelated with each other and the logic behind them. Stable, row 48, is yatziv. Okay, this can be both weather, a person's finances, any situation can be yatziv. How do we say unstable? Many Hebrew words, when we want to add un, the equivalent of un in Hebrew, is often this word bilti. Bilti comes from the same, word as bli. We talked about this last week about lilo and bli. Bli means without. Okay, when it's used like this, often with a hyphen between itself and the word it's modifying, it means un. Okay, so in this case, stable, if I want to say the opposite of stable, instead of saying lo yatziv, I would say bilti yatziv, right? Just like in English, something is not stable, it's unstable. Okay, so something unstable is bilti yatziv. You'll see this a lot, something that is impossible, bilti efshari. There are many other examples. I can't think of a lot off the top of my head, but just know that yatziv, the opposite is not lo yatziv, it's bilti yatziv. And you'll see this quite a bit in modern Hebrew. Okay, I see we have a bunch of questions. I'm going to stop here. A quick but important lesson to be sure about how to do small talk, and weather is often people's go-to for that. So Q&A. Great questions here. Okay. So let me pull up the screen again. Okay, so let me pull up the Q&A. Lillian asks, how to say fan? Let me just write that right into here in the chart. Me av rare. A fan. Okay, me'avrer, number 9, a fan. Know that me'avrer is referring to a fan like a ceiling fan or a standing fan. It's not referring to a fan that you would necessarily fan yourself with. That's a different verb that we use. Me'avrer usually refers to an electrical fan. Okay, but it's coming from the same root of avir. Okay. Graham asks, why 2 vavs in avil? Great question, Graham. The reason is because we want to ensure that we pronounce it as v. If we were to take out one of those vavs, then you will see spellings that have the vav out of it, but that is also predicated that you know how to read Hebrew without the bars and dots, right? Bars and dots are called nikud in Hebrew, and they indicate vowel sounds. In everyday Hebrew, we do not use these. We only use them to emphasize the spelling of a word if it's unclear, or for those who are learning Hebrew. If I were to take that out, that word could be pronounced differently. Very simple, because oftentimes a vav in the middle of a word does not sound like v. It sounds like o or u. It's usually a vowel placeholder. So if I were to take that out, some people could think that's pronounced uyar. Uyar is actually a word. It means he was illustrated or it was illustrated. So to ensure that that doesn't happen, we spell it with 2 vavs to make sure that you pronounce it avir. Okay, very great, very important question for sure. Miri, how do they describe icy roads or icy sidewalks? Great question. We'll usually use the word for slippery, which is, let me write that here. It does not happen in many places in Israel, so that's why it's not a commonly used word. But let me write that here. Slippery. Let me just make that bigger so everyone can see. Okay, machlik is slippery. Something that is machlik is slippery. Lahachlik is to slip. Slippery, machlik. Rob and Susie, thank you for correcting my English grammar. No apostrophe necessary after days as in 2 days ago. Again, please write that in the chat for future points, not in the Q&A, but thank you so much for that. Elizabeth asks, what is a chamsin? Like I replied, chamsin is usually a hot, dry wind that comes from the east or the south. It's usually very windy. It's usually what we often call a sandstorm. In modern Hebrew, people often confuse it with a sharav because they're both typified happening only in the summer. It's a lot of hot air in the air. The difference is chamsin actually has wind with it. Sharav, there is no wind. Alan, I heard Shemesh is too sifuti. Sifoti meaning literary, or it's too highbrow also, you could say, Alan. You can say etmol balayla. I am giving you all an upgrade in your vocabulary. It is not enough, I believe, as a fellow Oleh, that you learn the basic words. You should also learn how to upgrade your vocabulary as you're learning basic things. So by all means, use the word emesh. You will impress people. We're also talking about small talk here. So what better way to impress a complete stranger than using the word emesh? Okay. Dov asks, how do we ask if rain or storm is expected? Okay, we have the word expected in Hebrew. Let me write that here. A great word to know. Sorry. Tsafui. Okay. Tsafui is an adjective and it means expected. Tsafui, tsfuya, tsfuyim, tsfuyot. Okay, so you can simply say, Tsafui laredet geshem. It is expected to rain today. Okay, it's expected to rain. Tsafui you can use in any context that you would use the English word expected, a great word to have. Okay. Elizabeth, air conditioner, I said is mazgan. You can look that word up as well, but mazgan is related to the word for mezig avil. Very important word, excuse me, to have. Anonymous asks, how do you say fresh air? Well, we have the word for air, right? Avil. Right, where was it? Row 7, right? Avil is air. Fresh, you would typically say, you would actually not translate it literally and say fresh air and use the word for fresh in Hebrew. Typically, you'll simply say naki. Okay, naki, if it comes up. Na-ki. Come on. Na-ki. Okay. Naki, we usually translate into English as clean, right? However, in this case, I would say avir naki, to say fresh air, clean air, right? Because oftentimes that's what we're also saying when something is fresh air, it's also clean air. It also sometimes can mean natural. Okay, but usually naki has to do with cleanliness. Nikayon is cleaning. So avir naki is fresh air, but also clean air. I would say both of them. Carol, I wrote the meteorological website in the chat box. It's ims.gov.il if you can't see it. Anonymous asks, is ruach used for wind? Correct. The word for wind in Hebrew is ruach, and I'm also going to add ruach uchot. Wind. Oh, sorry. Oh, ach, uchot. Typically, when you're reading the forecast, it's not going to use the word for wind like we would in English as a collective noun. We will use instead the word ulchot. Ulchot are winds, literally winds. It's the plural of ruach, and we'll usually use that. So right now we're talking about a big storm in which there are ulchot chazakot, strong winds. Chazak is strong. So ulchot chazakot, strong winds or strong wind. Either way, we would say in English. In Hebrew, we'll typically only use the plural when it comes to forecasts. Okay. Yes, I did post the website. It is in the chat box. Right, ims.gov.il. I'm posting it again for those of you who did not catch it, but you can also look it up. It's called the Israel Meteorological Service. If you don't catch that, you can just write it into Google and find it yourself. Okay. Okay, any last questions about this class? I see a lot of people asking about the class about medical appointments. I promise you, we have already actually gone over medical appointments in the past. If you go to youtube.com, look up our previous channels, you will see how to make an appointment. And I've already explained very explicitly, I am not a medical expert, and so we're not going to go over everyone's personal medical issues. But our next class, after we do a little bit more small talk and after our break for a few weeks, we will definitely go over how to make an appointment. It is a very important term. I'm actually going to pronounce it very slowly so you can all pronounce it with me when we do that class, and you can write it down, you can jot it down, you can record it. I recognize that is a major struggle for a lot of you on this call. However, there's many other things to talk about in modern Hebrew, not just medical appointments. So with that, thank you all so much. Toda rabah. For any please go to youtube.com for this lesson, which will be up in the next 1 to 2 days, and all the other previous lessons. And you will get a notice from Nefesh B'Nefesh when we restart in January 2022. Toda rabah, thank you all so much, and I will see you all very soon. Lehitraot.